Albert, you were in the police service for a fair few years, 12 I think?
Yeah, I was a Metropolitan Special Constable and for 10 years and for the last 2 years with Thames Valley Police.
But although you're spending a fair bit of time with the police, you're not actually in the police anymore. What are you doing?
I'm no longer a police officer. I'm retired. I hit the upper age limit and they wouldn't let me stay much as I wanted to. But what I'm doing at the moment is I am attempting to get the police service today to investigate allegations of serious crime against people who worked in the Heath government in 1971-72. The crimes that I want investigated are a conspiracy to subvert the Constitution, the crime of sedition at common law, and a conspiracy to hand this country over to a foreign power, the crime of treason at common law.
Have you got evidence of this?
I have absolute evidence of this on official government-headed notepaper, all with Central Registry and Public Record Office stamped, and all wonderfully signed around the margins by the people who actually were committing these crimes.
So what are you actually doing with this evidence?
Initially I took this evidence to Thames Valley Police, who informed me, their Sergeant Thomas informed me that sedition is not a crime. So I'd actually taken the liberty of photocopying the relevant legislation from the relevant law books, and I've said to him that just in case Thames Valley Police were unaware of what the law of this country is, I've taken the liberty of photocopying the relevant sections out of the relevant books. This is from a police law book, and this one is from a constitutional law book. And just in case you think I've made it all up, I brought the books with me as well.
So what's the grand plan?
The grand plan actually is to get the police to actually do the job that they are very well paid to do, which is to uphold the laws of England. And in order to do that, they need to interview and arrest and interview under caution the surviving people from the conspiracies set up by Edward Heath.
Will they actually do it?
They don't want to do it. I have to say they do not want to do it. They are being dragged kicking and screaming against their will to doing this. Unfortunately, in this day and age, we don't have old-fashioned policemen who took an oath and then lived or died by that oath. We now have a politically correct and politically influenced police force who really, they look at the fact that they're dealing with government and they backpedal like the clappers, although their oath, given with the evidence, tells them and us and everybody that in fact they should actually uphold the law of this country. They don't want to do it, and as I say, they're kicking and screaming against doing it, and it's my ambition and aim to actually force them into doing the job that they are paid to do.
So you're giving them this evidence. How does this actually happen physically? How does this practically happen?
Physically, I took it to the police station. 4 days later they phoned my home and spoke to my wife and told her that it would be a waste of their time investigating it and to tell me that they weren't going to. She said, don't talk to me, talk to my husband. They said, oh no, we don't want to talk to your husband, just tell him. I then looked up the police station on the internet and wrote the chief superintendent there, chief superintendent there, a letter pointing out to him that I thought it was the height of bad manners not to answer not want to talk to me in the first place, having taken the trouble to drive from my home to the 15 miles to his police station and back in order to report the crime, and that I wanted an immediate interview with him early in the new year, because we were over the Christmas period by now, in order that he could explain to me the lack of professionalism of his officers and why it was that Thames Valley Police don't appear to be prepared to uphold the law of England.
And what's happened now?
I received a letter from a superintendent who was the commanding officer at St Aldate's Police Station in Oxford, telling me that he felt this was governmental, as did his sergeant, and that I should take this up with the government. And he said that should I wish to report a crime, then what I should do is I should phone a given number, and then it would or would not get investigated, depending entirely upon the resourcing policy of Thames Valley Police.
So it sounds like they're giving you the runaround. What are you going to do about it?
Well, what I did about it was I wrote to him And I pointed out to him that no, I don't wish to be in the European Union. In fact, it's illegal under English constitutional law, it being against the law for Parliament to surrender any of their rights to govern to a foreign power unless we've been defeated in war. The man had been on the radio the day before in Oxford Radio saying that he'd been a Royal Marine. So I then said to him, well, as a Royal Marine, you will have been taught that we haven't lost a war since 1066, and for the past 300 years, the Royal Marines have been distinguishing themselves around the world, ensuring we only win wars. I then went on to tell him that I wish to report the crimes of a conspiracy to subvert the Constitution, the crime of sedition at common law, and a conspiracy to hand this country over to a foreign power, the crime of treason at common law. And that I had absolutely no idea whatsoever what Thames Valley Police's resourcing policy was, but I was fully aware of the fact that a failure to investigate these serious allegations of crime was in fact a serious neglect of duty under the police discipline codes and the criminal offence of misprision of treason.
So if I understand it right, you are now accusing the police themselves of a criminal offence by not doing anything about this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, over the next couple of months, in fact, I then wrote several letters and we had several phone calls. I had told the superintendent that I wished, standing in front of me, to have a living, breathing, flesh and blood police officer ready to take a crime report. I actually got two. This was after the superintendent's assistant, who was a police constable, had phoned me up and said, exactly what do you want? And I told them what I wanted. And they then said, well, we've talked to the Crown Prosecution Service about this, who say they can't prosecute it. It has to be the Attorney General, and they don't think the Attorney General will. To which I replied, well, I trust then that you can, I trust then that the British public, who pay an awful lot of money in rates and taxes to pay your wages, can rely upon you to do the job you are being paid to do, which is arrest the Attorney General for perverting the course of justice and misprision of treason.
Okay, so at this point, are you...
The Attorney General is not above the law.
Even at this point, are you frightening them or making them laugh?
They are quite concerned because they, as I say, they sent me two detectives who they said were from Special Branch. So they weren't actually laughing very much, no. We then went on for about 5 months in total, because I reported this in the last week in December initially, and I recently received a letter from the superintendent telling me that he had consulted legal advice and that he has in fact a prerogative to decide whether in fact he will investigate crime or not, that most of the witnesses are dead, that he's not prepared to reallocate already heavily committed resources to investigating it, and that it would not in fact be prudent to investigate it.
So is that the end of the matter?
No, I wrote back to him and told him that his prerogative is all in his mind. He doesn't have it. He's a police officer. He's paid to uphold the law, not decide which laws he will and won't uphold. I told him that not only were the witnesses not dead, quite a few of them were sitting in the House of Lords because they are suspects in the case, and that it obviously would not be prudent to investigate it for the people involved in the conspiracy, who, had they been found out at the time, we would have hung them, and are now looking at the rest of their lives in prison.
So you're bouncing letters around and the Chief Constable's playing a dead bat to all this. So where's this going to go, do you think?
Well, the Chief Constable in fact did that, and in fact I then submitted a formal complaint against the Superintendent for a serious neglect of duty and the criminal offence of misprision of treason. I then received a visit from a Detective Chief Inspector Howard at very short notice for the Complaints Department. They normally take at least half a year to get round to you. I got them in less than 4 weeks, where they told me that they'd investigated and that they had in fact cleared the Superintendent. I asked them in fact had they read the documents which I had submitted as evidence. They said they hadn't. I said, well, in that case, how can you clear him? Until you have satisfied yourself as to whether treason has or has not occurred, you cannot possibly say he hasn't committed it. So go away and read the documents. I wrote to his boss and asked him in fact to allocate a separate team to it.
So these complaints officers, is this where this is going to dry up, or is it going to...
No, it's not going to dry up there at all. I then went to the IPCC and complained to them.
That's the police complaints.
That's the police complaints department. But when I'd received the formal notification in writing from Thames Valley Police Complaints Department, they had alleged in there that I had in fact asked them to investigate treason under the 1689 Bill of Rights, which I had not. I had insisted that both offences...
Okay, we could go into the detail a lot.
Right.
But the real question here is, on the bigger scene, on the bigger stage, what's the effect of all this going to be?
The effect of all this is going to be that I've asked for an interview with a senior assistant commissioner at Scotland Yard. I'm going to be taking the documents to them. I have already been in communication by phone with Scotland Yard and letter. One of their superintendents, who's an assistant to the assistant commissioner involved, phoned me the other day.
But aren't they going to give you the brush off in the end?
No, I don't think they are, because he's writing to Thames Valley Police. Initially he said he would phone them to find out what was going on, and he then said to me, no, I won't phone them, I will write to them. That way they have to write back to me. That way we start a paper trail and a file. So no, I don't think they will.
So where do you think it's going to go?
There's only one place it can go, and that is that the police do the job they're paid to do, that they investigate the allegations, for which there is ample evidence. Thames Valley Police, in fact, told me, their DCI from their complaints department told me that they didn't want to investigate this and weren't going to, because if they investigated my allegations, which they could do, and provided a crime book number, and they in fact produced results on those investigations, which they could do with the evidence, then in fact they would have to go on and arrest every government minister for the last 35 years and charge them with treason, which they were not prepared to do. And as such, they've taken the path of least resistance and refused to do anything.
So what's it going to take to get them to investigate every government minister for the last 35 years?
Well, what I'm going to be doing is, when I see the Metropolitan Police, and I've told the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police this already, I wrote to her and told her, that I have now formed the opinion that they in fact have an agreement at the highest level not to investigate the allegations of sedition and treason which I am making, and that in itself is the criminal offence of compounding treason, and that I will in fact be laying that allegation with another police service in order for the other police force can go in and investigate Thames Valley Police on a charge of compounding treason.
Now, you were saying earlier that this is something that you want other people to do as well.
Yes, I do, and I think in order to do this, I mean, it's me doing this on my own is all very well, but I want people all over the country to get copies of the information that I have and to actually print them out and actually take them into their own police station, actually hand them over the counter and say, I want to report a crime. The police force in that particular station are eventually going to turn around and say, look, we're not investigating this. So everybody then turns around and says, right, we're going to submit a formal complaint against this officer here who signed a bit of paper saying they're not going to investigate it for a misprision of treason and a serious neglect of duty by failing to investigate allegations of serious crime. If this appears and is done over an entire police force area, at some stage the complaints department for that police force will end up with a big pile of complaints about all of the officers commanding all of their police stations right across their area on their desk. At that stage they can no longer ignore it because it's too big to ignore. So they then go to the Chief Constable and the police authority and say, look, we've got all this, I've got 24 complaints here, we've got 24 superintendents on the force, and I've got 24 complaints about each one of them. You know, what do we do?
So the end of this is what? What's the bottom line here?
The end of this is that I want to see people who are currently sitting in the House of Lords or drawing good government pensions prosecuted for the criminal offences of sedition and treason. I want to see them sent to jail for the rest of their lives, because we don't hang them anymore, which is what they rightly deserve. And I want then for the 1972 Act to be scrapped, because you cannot possibly allow, it's contrary to every aspect.
The 1972 Act is what?
Is the European Economic Communities Act, 1972 European Economic Communities Act, which was put through Parliament by Heath, which allowed him to go away and sign the Treaty of Rome.
So that's the thing that got us into the common market.
Yes, absolutely. That's the thing that got us into the common market. We cannot possibly, it offends every principle of natural justice to allow a law to stay on the statute books, which in fact was put there as a result of treason of the government of the day.